Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. Thank you for joining us today for the 10th lecture of our LaSalle Sustainability Lecture Series. The Sustainability Lecture Series is an initiative of De La Salle University in cooperation with the International Association of the LaSalle Universities. We have monthly talks that are meant to engage the global LaSallian community in responding to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Pope Francis Laudato Si encyclicals. To start us off, I would like to call the Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation, Professor Raymond Tan, to give us the opening remarks.
Thank you, Dean Avisa. DLSU President, Brother Bernard Oca, former DLSU President, Brother Ray Suplido, Chancellor Emeritus, and one of our staunch supporters from day one, DLSU's representative to the International Association of LaSalle University's Research Committee, Dr. Carmelita Quebenco, colleagues from academia, both within the LaSallian community and other educational institutions, colleagues from stakeholders in government, such as the Department of Education and various foundations dedicated to improving the quality of education. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on which part of the world you're in. It's my pleasure to be opening this 10th webinar of the 2020 Sustainability Lecture Series. This talk has been in the works for such a long time, and if you'll indulge me and allow me to recount the events that led to this. In late 2019, just a few months before the pandemic, the 2018 Program for International Student Assessment results were released. And in the Philippines, it was met with plenty of consternation and outcry from media, from social media. And I remember Brother Bernie at the time told me, we need to do something about this. These are not results that we should be happy with. And of course, what happened next was one of the senior academics of our university, I don't know if he's here with us this morning, Dr. Tuliao, who's the head of the Angelo King Institute, proposed that we hold a workshop to look at the PISA results. And again, jointly with our speaker this morning, Dr. Bernardo. And at the end of the workshop, some ideas came up, and Dr. Tuliao proposed also that we can propose to use some of the money available within the Institute to provide mini grants to the various research teams who had ideas. And let's bear in mind that this was early in 2020. So not long after, of course, the world came to a screeching halt with the pandemic. And I thought at the time that the initiative was largely forgotten. Happily, earlier this year, I received a message from Dr. Bernardo mid-morning in the first half of the year. We have some results, he said. And apparently, amidst the normal visceral reaction that is usually what meets bad news in the Philippines, a small group of scholars decided that it was better to apply scholarly discipline, a craftsman-like approach to taking this problem and looking at it with depth and with analysis. And apparently there had been a team that had been formed, led by Dr. Bernardo, but including a pretty strong team. And if I may briefly mention the people involved, from the Brother Andrew Gonzalez College of Education, Dr. Rochelle Lucas, who has extensive grassroots experience at the front lines of the barriers to quality education in different parts of the Philippines, and especially in the remote rural areas. And then the team came upon the idea of maybe applying a different toolbox to the data. The data was there, freely available for anyone who would apply enough diligence to the analysis. And typically, education specialists would apply traditional statistical toolbox to the analysis of the data. the team had the idea of what if we take something a bit more cutting edge, take machine learning techniques, which perhaps can reveal insights that would not normally come to the surface and might be the basis for novel policy recommendations to improve education in the Philippines in the future. And now comes the team of the head of our Andrew Tan Data Science Institute and author of the most cited paper on deep learning by any Filipino researcher to date, Dr. Mac Cordell, and his team of data scientists. I believe Ms. Eunice Chua is here with us. I saw her earlier, and some research assistants, Jude Michael Teves and Sashmir Yap. And this team, again, after the PISA bad news was buried under all of the other exciting news that came since. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic. Much more recently, election season has come into the picture. This band of scholars has persisted and applied the discipline of looking at the problem and solving this transgenerational issue, which will affect the control and reduction of poverty in the Philippines in the future. And of course, what we've also seen, this paper, having already been published in a peer-reviewed journal, has gone through the scientific quality assurance. And I think for the international audience that we have with us this morning, the possibility that the same approach could be used for the PISA results in your own respective countries really brings to fore the prospect of cooperation and collaboration with this team. That said, of course, as we near the end of the first year of the Sustainability Lecture Series, I'm very pleased that we're starting the last quarter of the year on a high note. And I will stop talking because I can go on for hours with my accolades for the team. Thank you and good morning. I hope you find the talk interesting.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Tan. So now let me introduce our speakers more formally. Okay, let me just spotlight our speakers for everyone to see. All right, okay. So we have three speakers for this morning. Our first speaker is a full professor and chair of the Department of English and Applied Linguistics and a former vice dean of the Brother Andrew Gonzalez FSC College of Education of De La Salle University, Manila. She has completed her Bachelor in Science and Education, major in English cum laude, and Master of Arts in Literature, magna cum laude, at the University of Santo Tomas. She has a Doctor of Philosophy in Applied Linguistics degree from De La Salle University, and she has published in Scopus and ISI Index journals on psycholinguistics, bilingualism, multilingualism, second language acquisition, motivation, language anxiety, and alternative assessment. She was a fellow at the International Dean's Course under the German Academic Exchange Service, or DAAD, in 2010 to 2011. She was former president of the Linguistic Society of the Philippines and secretary of the Comparative Education Society of the Philippines. She is a board member of various professional organizations such as Linguistic Society of the Philippines, Summer Institute of Linguistics, Philippine Social Science Council, and Social Science Research Ethics Board. She has also been appointed as field contributor for Ethnologue, Languages of the World, an international language documentation website. She is also a member of various editorial boards of national and international journals, namely Philippine Journal of Linguistics, TESOL Journal, Philippine ESL Journal, Sinergia and Ciencia Hills, and she has recently completed a language documentation research on Hanunoo Mangyan, funded by the DOST National Research Council of the Philippines. She is a co-researcher in a 3-year Erasmus Mundus project for science teachers in the country. The only rose among our speakers for today is Professor Rochelle Irene Lucas. But let me continue on and introduce the rest of our speakers. Our second speaker is the executive director of the Dr. Andrew L. Tan Data Science Institute. He is also a research fellow of Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization Innotech Research Partnership Grant Project and associate professor of the College of Computer Studies at De La Salle University, Manila. He completed his PhD in computer science degree from DLSU with a research internship at the Sesame Research Center of the National University of Singapore. Aside from numerous internally funded research grants, he has successfully completed for the CMAO Innotech Research Grant and has completed a research grant from the DOST PSHER. He has authored and co-authored high-quality research publications in reputable Scopus conferences and journals. The earliest publication on CNN-based solutions from the Philippines, dated in 2016, is the earliest deep learning solution for classifying the country's public utility vehicles recorded using then low-resolution road cameras. This particular publication belongs to the top 1% of its peer group, according to Scopus Worldwide. His research area is in computer vision and machine learning. Let's welcome Dr. Macario Cordel. Our third speaker is a distinguished university professor and university fellow at De La Salle University. His current research relates to three broad themes: cultural aspects of hope, character strengths and well-being, socioeconomic inequality, social mobility and other inequalities, and polyculturalism and intergroup relations in intercultural contexts, and applied data analytics and education research.
Okay, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Okay, I don't know okay. Our third speaker has published over 260 articles, book chapters, monographs, edited books, and is among the most cited Filipino social scientists. He has received numerous awards for his scholarship, including the International Prize for Literacy Research given by the UNESCO Institute of Education Achievement Award. By the National Research Council of the Philippines, Outstanding Psychologist by the Psychological Association of the Philippines, and the Outstanding Professional Psychologist of the Year by the Professional Regulations Commission. He was elected a life member academician of the National Academy of Science and Technology, the country's peer-elected group of scholars who have made outstanding contributions to science and technology. Let us welcome academician Alan Bernardo. So good morning, everyone. So Dr. Lucas, you may begin with your lecture.
Good morning, everyone. So maybe I can start by giving you a scenario of our reading situation here in the Philippines. Next slide, please. Well, the Philippines may be ranked by the United Nations or UN in 2016 as the country with the highest literacy rate at 97.95% among Southeast Asian countries such as Brunei, Indonesia, and Singapore. It continues to struggle as students face great challenges in reading. Even if the Department of Education or DepEd developed several programs that aim to help students read, they find little success as some learners are still unable to read or read with comprehension and were promoted to higher grade levels. In a study conducted by Abeberese, Kumler, and Linden in 2011, they found that schools do not provide an environment where reading is encouraged. Moreover, the curriculum does not emphasize this, as the skill is embedded with other language skills. And there seems to be a lack of age-appropriate materials, which will get students to actively read. Given the situation, reading may not be seen as learners as a task that can be perceived as a source of enjoyment and information. In some educational settings, opportunity to read and accessibility of reading materials may be limited due to the availability of resources in these learning environments. Students belonging to lower income groups may find academic requirements as a burden as they prioritize work to help their families earn a living. Reading becomes a task solely associated with school requirements and is considered just a waste of time and resources. The motivations and attitudes towards reading may become dependent on the learner's socioeconomic background and educational affiliation, whether the learners study in a public or private institution. Next slide, please. The Program for International Assessment, or PISA, is an international assessment held every 3 years that measures 15-year-old learners' ability in the areas of reading, mathematics, and science in using their knowledge and skills in real-life challenges. PISA is coordinated with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, an intergovernmental organization of industrialized nations. It was first administered in the year 2000 and now covers around 80 countries. In 2018, the Philippines participated in this exam for the first time. Around 7,233 students from 187 schools across the country, which is 68% of the total population of Filipino 15-year-old students took the assessment. The 2018 PISA marks the third time reading was included as a major domain. It was also the second time that revisions were made to the reading literacy framework to reflect the changing definitions of reading literacy and how it is acquired and used by the learners in a variety of contexts. Next slide, please. In the 2018 PISA test, 15-year-old learners from the Philippines ranked last among 79 countries in reading and in the low 70s in science and mathematics. Around 80% of these students did not reach a minimum level of proficiency in reading, which is the largest shares of low performers amongst all PISA participating countries. Although PISA allows countries to use their language of instruction as the language of testing, the Philippines used English as the language for the assessment, as there was an assumption that the test takers have reached sufficient level of understanding in the English language. Next slide, please. Problems in the key linguistic skills may act as constraints for reading, particularly at the early phases of reading development. This view is supported by evidence showing that reading ability is strongly predicted by cognitive pre-reading skills that should be developed years before school entry. From the cognitive perspective of learning to read, reading comprehension, or simply reading, is the ability to construct linguistic meaning from written representations of language. At the heart of the cognitive skills identified is phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is the foundation for learning to read. It is the ability to recognize and work with sounds of spoken language. If these linguistic skills are not fully developed early on, these may affect the reading development of children. Next slide, please. The poor reading comprehension of Filipino students has been identified as the major factor in the dismal performance of these learners in school, which also affects their performance in subjects such as math and science. Next slide, please. The current study is guided by the following objectives. First, we would like to identify the various non-cognitive factors related to Filipino learners' home backgrounds, learning beliefs, and motivations, classroom and school experiences. Next slide, please. Second, we would like to develop models that can distinguish between Filipinos with low proficiency and those with better reading proficiency through machine learning classification approaches. Next slide, please. And lastly, we would like to develop policy reforms or educational interventions that can be considered to address the debilitating factors of lowest performing Filipino students in reading. Next slide, please. The current study is informed by Bronfenbrenner's socio-ecological systems theory. This theory looks at child development as a highly complex system that involves relationships affected by factors such as family and school settings and cultural values, practices, and beliefs. Bronfenbrenner further extends this theory by dividing the human environment into 5 different systems. These are microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and chronosystem. He identified the microsystem as the most influential system of his socio-ecological system theory, as this is the most immediate environmental settings involving the child's family and school. It can be observed that relationships in a microsystem are bidirectional. That is, the child can be influenced by other people in their environment and is also capable of changing the beliefs and actions of other people too. Similarly, the reactions of the child to individuals within their microsystem can influence how they treat and perceive them in return. It can be noted that the interactions within microsystem are often very personal and important for the promotion of the child's development and well-being. Therefore, there is a positive effect on the child's development if the child is in a strong relationship with his or her parents, and negative effect on the total well-being of the child if he or she grows with distant and unaffectionate parents. Next slide, please. Beyond the cognitive factors that predict success in reading, several factors were identified by our current study. These non-cognitive variables characterize the personal beliefs, motivations, experiences, and resources that distinguish the Filipino readers with the lowest proficiency in reading from the rest of the students. Guided by Bronfenbrenner, we also identified 3 interrelated social environments or contexts that link together most of these variables and strongly impact the students' poor reading performance. These contexts are the socio-economic context of the family and home, the reading classroom context, and the school's social context. I give the floor to Dr. Mack for his discussion on the machine learning approaches that were utilized for this current study.
Hi. Hello. I'm sorry. I'm not Mac. but I think Mac was disconnected because of his internet connection. But I will continue with his presentation. He was able to give me his script. So next slide, please. So several studies that have mined the PISA data, but these were in the context of those who performed well. They reached at most 78% in binary classification tasks and directly performed feature analysis. In this work, we exhaustively searched the best ML or machine learning model in terms of classification accuracy before performing feature analysis to ensure that our analysis validity. To reiterate, our goal in doing this ML-based study is to explain the salient variables of the most accurate machine learning predictor that discriminates very low-performing students from the others. The average performance of all the participating countries is within level 2, which is also the minimum proficiency level set by the OECD. On the left side of the slide, we show the distribution of the reading levels of Filipino students. The Philippines' average performance is within the proficiency level 1A only. Around 38% of Filipino students were classified as having proficiency level 1B. 27% Filipino students performed within proficiency level 1A. Around 15% of them were classified as having the lowest proficiency level 1C and below 1C. All in all, about 80% of Filipinos were classified as having proficiency level below level 2. Again, the minimum proficiency level. Our primary focus is the students who perform significantly below the standard according to the PISA reading levels, as these very poor readers are likely to be the ones who will be unable to progress in education and who need to be the focus in our educational interventions. Thus, the low-performing category includes students in levels 1B, 1C, and 1C and below. The quote-unquote high-performing category includes students in levels 1A, 2, 3, and up. The distribution of the low and high-performing students are shown on the right side of the screen. Next slide, please. So 83% of the students come from the public schools as shown on the left, while average reading performance lower than that of the private school as shown on the right. So next slide, please. We begin mining the PISA reading data by identifying the variables based on the previous empirical studies in literacy development and reading education as discussed by Dr. Shell. The variables can be grouped into personal and contextual variables. Some of the entries have missing data in their variables, so we conducted data imputation using K nearest neighbors. Determined empirically, we use K equals 7 for the KNN data imputer. We then perform variable scaling by normalization. As mentioned earlier, we first identify the most accurate machine learning predictor for discriminating very low performing students from the rest of the students. For this purpose, different binary classification models were compared to determine the optimal classifier for distinguishing low and better performing students. We considered KNN, logistic regression, SVM or support vector machines, MLP or multi-layer perceptron, and different tree-based approaches. Afterwards, we look for the important variables that determine the category of the students. So for the next slide, I think Mac is here, so he will continue.
Thank you very much, Eunice. A grid search approach to determine the best set of hyperparameters for each of the ML models identified is used. SVM is found to be the best machine learning model for classification with accuracy equal to 81.2%. The confusion matrix on the right shows the actual number of test samples that are high-performing, classified as high-performing, which is at the top left of the confusion matrix, and low-performing students classified as low-performing students, which is at the bottom right of the confusion matrix. The off diagonals are in blue, which implies low misclassification count of the SVM model. Next slide, please. Please refer to figure 8 to illustrate a two-dimensional feature data. Support vector machines, or SVM, is a machine learning method that finds a particular linear model by maximizing the space between the decision boundary and the data points. By maximizing the space, the SVM increases the total confidence in the prediction. So the closest training points to the decision boundary are called the support vectors. Figure B shows that feature X value is more important than the feature Y value in determining the classification of a sample. For a more complex, non-linearly separable data, such as in figure C, the input spaces are transformed into a more complex feature space via a kernel, such as in figure D, where it is easier to find a decision boundary. So this kernel trick allows us to achieve a higher accuracy rate of 81.2% as compared with other works which is equal to around 78%. Next, please. While there is a known trade-off between machine learning interpretability, because we're using SVM, and accuracy, recent advances in algorithms for machine learning models interpretability, in our opinion, remove this dilemma. One of these algorithms for interpretability is the Shapley value used in this work. So let's just go over with the block diagram. So we look for the salient features that best separates our training data into two categories: the low and high performing students, using SHAP or Shapley additive explanation. So the algorithm is based on computational game theory. So it is an iterative algorithm that exhaustively search for the best feature combination. So that's why you have a combination expression there in the diamond part left side. So it is an iterative so it's an iteration. So there is a loop in the upper portion and the lower portion of the block diagram. So afterwards, we distribute the gain to each feature. Then SHAP adds the gains gathered by each feature for different number of feature sets, providing us a way to compare feature importance at a global level as compared with other approaches. Next, please. Shown in this plot is the visualization showing the top 20 important variables in descending order. So the SC-read diff variable is the most important variable in the binary classification task. The x-axis shows whether the influence of that variable value is linked with higher or lower predictions. So each dot represents a variable value of one training data. And a dot nearer the blue color means a low variable value. SC-read diff, which is the most salient variable according to SHAP, is inversely related to predicting high-performing students. Similarly, low being bullied variable is directly related to predicting high-performing students. Next, please. Finally, we are currently developing a visualization tool for decision makers for a more intuitive association of variables to the PH reading performance. This will soon include PH performance in math, science, and global competency, with provisions for uploading new PISA results in the future. So we can show the visualization tool later if we have time. And Doc Alan will discuss the interrelation of the salient variables and the reading performance of the Filipino students in detail. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mac, Eunice, and Rochelle. So what Mac showed you are the 20 factors that seem to be most important in distinguishing between the group of low-performing readers and the better readers in the Philippine sample. What we now need to do is to make sense of these 20 factors to help us understand the educational experience of the poor readers in the hope of having a more nuanced understanding of what's going on and the factors that contribute to their poor performance. And we did that by first making sense of how these variables somewhat clustered together. And we found first some reading related variables. And as Mac mentioned, the most influential factor in the SHAP analysis was the students' reading self-concept. That is, the students who were poor readers according to PISA are students who have already identified themselves as having difficulty in reading. And let me remind you that these are 15-year-olds. So this reading self-concept is something that has probably evolved across their 9 or 10 years in the basic education system. But if we look at these students, the poor readers are also students who don't enjoy reading, who don't even enjoy reading fiction, and they have rather poor strategies to help them improve their reading comprehension. So these are reading-related variables found in the top 20, but we also found variables related to the teachers of these poor readers. For example, we found that these poor readers report that their teachers tended to have low enthusiasm in their English language classes. And also, these teachers tend to be higher in terms of certain types of instructional approaches, which include giving feedback regarding their performance and asking students what they think about the reading material. Offhand, you might say, what's wrong with those two strategies? Later, I'm going to tell you why these factors may not be helpful for these poor readers. Aside from the teaching variables, we also found several variables related to ICT. In particular, one of the more important predictors was that the poor readers tended to come from homes or families where there were fewer or less ICT resources. And you will not be surprised that these students, therefore, do not use ICT for more interactive types of purposes. So they do not use ICT to do online searches for whatever topics they're studying in school. They don't use ICT to engage in chats with their classmates if they want to do group study or anything like that. Instead, they use ICT mainly for low-level, more passive types of activities like reading emails, which probably doesn't happen very often as well. Now, we also found a significant number of factors that could be considered to be learning motivation factors that apply to a wide range of subjects, not just to reading. In particular, we found that the poor readers are persons who do not have strong persistence in mastering particular tasks in schools, not just reading, but all types of tasks in school. They also set lower mastery achievement learning goals. So they're not aiming to master the tasks in the school. They don't also value schooling. They don't see schooling as important in their future lives. And perhaps this is related to the fact that they're also more likely to report lower occupational status expected after they finish high school. The results also show that poor readers tended to have a more fixed mindset, which means that the opposite of this is they have a low growth mindset. So they do not think that they can improve their abilities, which, if you think about it, is related to the fact that they have already embraced a poor reading self-concept. If we go to the school, we also find variables that were associated with the students' experiences in their school social environment. In particular, Mac mentioned that one of the strongest predictors was that the poor readers tended to be more likely to report exposure to bullying, but also they were reporting lower sense of belonging in the school social environment, and they also tended to perceive lower cooperation among the students in their school. Finally, one of the factors that kind of staring us in the data is that the poor readers were from families who had low economic, social, and cultural resources. So they're from low economic, social, and cultural status in their communities. these are the factors that the machine learning SVM in particular indicated. So although we can group them in order to extract insights as to why the students are performing poorly and what we can do to help these students, we still need to see how these variables work in a manner that helps us understand why these 15-year-olds who are poor readers are in this particular state. And as Rochelle mentioned, we're guided by Bronfenbrenner's socio-ecological theory, which helps us understand how the child is developing certain ways of understanding the world, and the child is adapting and coping with the different systems in his or her environment. The PISA data actually gives us a lot of information in terms of the meso and microsystem. And as Rochelle mentioned, these are very important in the development of the child. The PISA data actually provide data in the broader macroculture. If we had analyzed, for example, the 79 countries and territories, we perhaps could have insights about the macro system. But also, if we have access to more longitudinal data, we could also understand these changes over time, except that the Philippines only participated in PISA the first time, so we don't have that. So if we focus, so our analysis focus on the meso and micro systems of the school, and based on what the SHAP analysis and the SVM data reveal, we actually can characterize the microsystem of the family as being primarily one of having low economic, social, and cultural resources. And I'm going to explain how this relates to some of the variables later on. And then when we look at the mesosystem of the school, we characterize two specific areas, which is first the reading classroom, and then later the larger school environment. So let me begin with what we see in terms of the home and the family as the microsystem. We think that this is related to, as I said, the factor of the low economic, social, and cultural status of the families. So this means the poor readers are these students who come from families where the parents have lower educational attainment, have lower economic, occupational status. There are fewer resources for learning at home, and that includes less access to ICT resources. And as I mentioned earlier, these lower resources for learning, particularly ICT resources at the home, limit the way they engage ICT for learning. So they don't engage in ICT in a more interactive way, and instead use it in a very passive way. Now, so this is the family environment. Now, previous research on motivation of Filipino students of the same cohort group also suggests that the socioeconomic status of the students have a very predictable relationship with the motivational sets of these students. In particular, low-income family students tend to bring weaker motivational sets to their school experience. In particular, and this is shown by the data, the students who are from lower economic, social, and cultural resource families and who are the poorer readers bring a lower sense of purpose in their engagement of the school environment. They don't set high learning and achievement goals and motivations. They do not value schooling as an important experience to help them in their imagined futures. And it is also related to the fact that they set lower occupational aspirations for themselves. This is associated with the kind of expectations that are probably nurtured in the home environment. Now, although as the data show, the growth mindset seems to be a factor that predicts reading proficiency, although we should say that there is no socioeconomic status difference related to growth mindset. Previous research suggests that the growth mindset tends to be more potent in the higher socioeconomic status family, does not seem to be as important in predicting achievement in the low SES families. So what are we saying here? That the low socioeconomic status of the families seem to have also an influence in the weaker motivational set of these poor readers. So imagine these are the students who come from less resourced homes with weaker motivational sets, and they now enter the classroom. And what is it that they experience here? As the data suggests, they report that their teachers are not very enthusiastic. This is in the English language classroom. And instead, teachers also engage them in activities that give them negative feedback about their performance. As I mentioned earlier, the teachers are not necessarily doing something bad in terms of giving performance feedback, asking the students to give their thoughts. But keep in mind that these are students who already have low or negative reading self-concept. So whatever performance feedback the teacher gives them further strengthens this negative self-concept and further pushes them away from an activity which they already do not enjoy in the first place. And keep in mind that they also do not have good reading strategies. So this teacher who already is not very enthusiastic, but is very keen on giving negative performance feedback, is not actually helping the students with appropriate reading strategies to improve their comprehension. Now, if we go beyond the classroom, what we see, is that the students report, the poor readers report experiences of bullying, low sense of belonging, and low cooperation among the students. If you take this all together, if you look at the social environment, it is an experience where the students are socially disconnected from the social environment of the school. Now, how do we make sense of all of these things? This is the picture that seems to be emerging. In terms of the personal level, the poor readers are students who already acknowledge this. They already see their difficulty in reading as part of their self-concept. They don't enjoy reading, even for reading fiction. And they have low motivations for schooling. And this is not helped by the fact that at home, they don't have the resources to help them in their learning pursuits. Now, these poor readers who already think they cannot improve their abilities, who already identify themselves as poor readers, enter the school environment. And what do we see? They enter classrooms where the teacher is not enthusiastic. The activities are not enjoyable. Instead, the activities threaten their sense of competence. The feedback about their poor reading performance, the activities they're asked to engage, make them feel even less competent about their reading and do not encourage them to try to engage the school environment in to take more risks in more challenging ways. And if they go outside the reading classroom and engage the larger social environment, what they now encounter are more threats to their social well-being, to their sense of relatedness, experiences of bullying where other students are not cooperative. And so there is a strong social disconnection with the school environment. If we look at the overall portrait of the 20 factors, what we see, you can make sense of it in terms of two ways of adapting, which is self-protection and distancing. Those who use the socio-ecological framework of Bronfenbrenner also point to different ways of adapting to environments in which the child or the learner has very low control. So in cases, this is not just common to the Philippines, this is quite well established in developmental research, where individuals who are in situations where they feel like they don't control the environment and the environment poses a lot of threats to their sense of self-worth and self-being, the adaptive way to respond is by self-protection and distancing. And what does that mean? Self-protection is you do not engage yourself in risky situations, and instead you put yourself in a space where you are safe in the sense that you remove those threats to your sense of competence and sense of social well-being and relatedness. And we see this in the way the students set lower expectations from themselves. They don't engage in mastery achievement goals. They don't persist in activities which they don't believe they can master, and they don't set high professional occupational expectations for themselves after college. Connected to self-protection is the idea of distancing. So these values associated that are supposed to be important in school, achievement, uh, um, using school as the means towards professional development and economic development, we see distancing. The child is saying, that's not important to me. Those are not my goals. The child is distancing himself or herself from these goals because they already think they're not going to achieve these goals. So they're belittling its importance. That's why school is not valuing for these students. If we look at it this way, we understand why the poor readers are poor readers. These are 15-year-olds who have already adapted by disengaging or perhaps unengaging themselves from the school environment. So in other words, they're there, their body is in the school, but their mind and their spirit is no longer there. They've already distanced themselves from what the school has defined as important because they're protecting their sense of self-worth because of all these threatening experiences they have in the school environment. So this seems to be the experience of the poor readers as suggested by the SVM data, the machine learning data, guided by Bronfenbrenner's socio-ecological theory. Now, if we now, how do we make sense of this? How do we find possible areas of action and intervention here? Now, in my interpretation, I highlighted the importance of the low economic, social, and cultural resources. Many educational reformers do realize that the problem of educational achievement is also the problem of poverty. And ironically, in the Philippines, the discourse is we think of education as a pathway. It is the foundation upon which people can get out of poverty. But the data kind of portray that as a very complicated proposition because the context of poverty does not set up the students for the types of resources and the motivational frameworks that will allow them to engage the educational experience in more productive ways. In terms of, we can solve the problem of poverty first, and then we will solve the problem of achievement, but that's kind of a more complicated proposition. But in terms of the interventions at the level of the mesosystem, one of the possibilities we can discuss is the access to ICT, because this may be an important entry point for changing the experiences in the family, which I'll talk about later on. But it does make sense that when we talk about policy and intervention focus, it will be focusing on the reading classroom and the school environment. And you notice that we have focused in this study on the social and psychological factors. We are aware that DepEd and other educational stakeholders have focused on, DepEd is now very much focused on the curriculum as a response to PISA. And of course, there has been a long-standing interest in improving instruction, focusing on what the teachers do. And we do acknowledge that those two factors are very important. But what our research shows is that if we focus on the social and psychological experiences of these learners, particularly the poor readers, we predict in a very high level of accuracy who are the poor readers and who are the better readers. Now, of course, the social and psychological factors are not independent of the instructional factors. As I said earlier, there might be certain instructional and assessment practices of the teacher, which is contributing to a more negative social and psychological experience of the students. So it is important that when we think of curricular and instructional interventions, we keep in mind the possible negative effects on the students. We need to see whether the curriculum and instruction interventions we do are somehow negatively impacting on the students' negative engagement, okay? Now, focusing, as I said, on the classroom and the school factors, we don't have to really invent reinvent the wheel so much. There is so much research from the literature in other countries and some extent in the Philippines about classroom-based interventions that can address these negative motivational sets and beliefs of the students. So there's a lot of research on how teachers can make the learning activities more engaging, thus improving motivation and engagement of the student. There are ways by which teachers can give performance feedback within the classroom and also through assessment procedures that are less threatening, that are instead challenging the student. There are ways by which teachers can make the classroom environment, or where schools can make the school environment, more cooperative and collaborative instead of competitive. There's been recent research on mindset interventions in other countries that are proven to be very effective. And a little bit of research, this is growing in the Philippines, where the results are still mixed. But also we need to think about these interventions, both in the classroom and the school, which encourage students to set higher standards and aspirations for themselves. Now, looking at possible areas of intervention at the school level, we do know of anti-bullying interventions that have been helpful. And these types of interventions typically involve engagement of the school, also the classroom teachers, as well as the larger community wherein the school environment is operating. Ways by which the schools attend to student well-being and fostering more cooperative environments in the school, and removing the social threats in the school environment and making the school a safe place, especially for these adolescent students. Now, as I said, there's a lot of literature or research that shows these effective interventions in other countries. But I want to call attention to what the results suggest in our interpretation, which embeds the findings within the child-specific microsystem and mesosystem. And I think this is also a reminder to make us realize that students who are not engaged may be unengaged or disengaged in different ways. So in other words, students may be showing low engagement in their school for very varied reasons. So for example, there might be students who were previously very highly engaged in school, but as they progress from high school, from primary to secondary, they become more disengaged. Whereas there may be students who were unengaged from the very start. So just another example, a student who does not set high occupational expectations, who comes from an urban poor community, may have arrived at this expectation very differently from a student from a remote rural community in one of the fourth or fifth class municipalities in the country. So what I'm trying to say here is that when we think of these interventions, we need to think in a more inclusive way. We should not think of one size fits all type of recommendations, and instead we should contextualize these interventions within the specific communities and schools, and talk about localized interventions to help attain these social development goals of improved quality. And therefore, in our report, we emphasize the systemic perspective. Our results show that poor reading achievement occurs in the context of poverty. Poverty is the inescapable context in which we find poor reading achievement. This context of poverty is what it's the immediate microsystem in which the student emerges, which is not very well resourced, which constrains the motivations and aspirations of the students. So these are students who go to the school environment with already a very constrained sense of what they're going to be able to achieve. And then they enter the school environment, which is unengaging, where activities are not enjoyable. And not only that, where the activities, some of the teaching practices, and some of the experiences in the social environment further threaten their sense of self-worth. And what we see is that these students are adapting to this environment by distancing themselves and protecting whatever little sense self-worth that they have. So in a sense, this is not the kind of social psychological mindset that's going to lift them out of poverty. Instead, it is keeping them in this context of poor achievement. This is my final slide. Let me just remind you that the PISA focuses on the high school students. These are 15-year-olds. But if these students already have kind of negative self-concepts in reading, this may have been a product of the past 10 years of their experience in the school. The OECD also has data on the primary schools, but we have not analyzed that. Perhaps if we are able to get some funds later on, we can study the TIMSS data that are already there. But let me just remind the audience that literacy development, as Rochelle mentioned, starts in the home. So we could also think of interventions that are directed at families. In other countries, there are many proven effective interventions at the home. And these involve very simple interventions with the parents that target developing phonological awareness, as Rochelle mentioned, and developing executive functioning, using print materials like reading book, but also games and also digital materials that are now available. We also need to look at how the early childhood education experience using the mother tongue literacy education is providing a more intensive and engaging way of developing more formal literacy skills. And then primary school, as the students transition to more multilingual education, this is when we are risking disengaging the students and affecting their motivation. So we also need to see what's going on at the primary school level. We don't know yet. As I said, the TIMSS data is not something we have looked at. But by the time the students get to high school, it may be too late. What we may be observing in PISA is something that has already accrued from the previous 10 years of their literacy-related experiences. So that is the end of our presentation. On behalf of my collaborators, Rochelle, Mac, Eunice, Sash, and Jude, thank you for listening. As Mac mentioned, we are doing similar projects related to maths and science as well, which we hope to share with you in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It was a very interesting research. So I just pinned all of our speakers. And now the floor is open for any questions from the audience. I did receive a few questions on the chat, so let me begin with that. So it actually comes from Raymond. Would you consider preparing a 5-minute highlight YouTube video for a broader public consumption? And there's a follow-up after that. And so again, let me just say, si Eunice nag-react. Okay, let me just ask the follow-up question. Should the vicious cycle of self-protection and poor performance be dealt with by creating an educational sandbox or a bubble to bring them up to speed?
If I may, on behalf of the team, I'm going to try to answer that. The bubble, it depends on what's going on in the bubble. Okay? But I see the point of the question, which is to try to engage the problematic aspects of the child's environment, okay? And try to then intervene so that the motivational sets can be shifted towards more positive environments. And yes, I do not believe we can completely create a bubble because we cannot completely remove the child from his or her family, right? And from the expectations of their families, okay? And distancing them from this microsystem will create other kinds of problems, which we may not want. And this might be people who are completely oblivious to the struggles of their families, okay? So, but yes, I think the spirit of the intervention is that it's not just in the classroom, okay? So we have to look into the environments in which students have been adapting, so to speak, and these environments which are shaping their self-beliefs, their motivations, and their expectations, okay? It's not quite, the problem with the bubble is that for some children, the school is a bubble that is disconnected from their personal life. And eventually they graduate from school and that bubble bursts. So it needs to be dealt with in a more complex way, but there are good points to that suggestion.
Okay, thank you. I think Brother Ray has a question.
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the team for this very, very interesting and I think very a source of wealth and resources for future studies and also changes in our educational environment. My question is, I think Rochelle mentioned that the PISA use English as the language for reading. I wonder if that has plays an important factor in the self-concept, in the engagement, in the because you know the attitude towards English has a different mindset for a student who has undergone so many years of native language training and also practice. I just wonder if that plays an important factor in PISA and whether the other countries also used English or did they use their native language in doing the PISA. It's just a question in the back of my mind. Yeah. But the other, I think, comments and recommendations you have certainly strike a very, very strong chord in my own heart of what we need to do in terms of helping our young people to continue to develop. So my question is just in that area of whether the use of English or English as a reference has played a factor in the PISA results.
If I may, and Rochelle, you can also chime in later. Just as a background, as Rochelle mentioned, the school system of each country was given the option to choose the language of testing. The Philippines, the DepEd chose English because the presumption was year 10 or 11 for 15-year-olds, the official medium of instruction was reading. So I think that was the presumption of DepEd. But other countries made different choices, in other words. No? So in many countries, the students were assessed in the official medium of their school. So very few. The Philippines is one of less than 5 countries which tested students in a language which was not used at home. Okay. Other countries even used different languages. So Malaysia, for example, had some students tested in Malayalam, others tested in English, others tested in Chinese. So school systems had that choice. Okay? Now, to Brother Ray's question of whether it may have affected, our hunch is that yes, because the factors that were asked the students were specific to the English class. So when I say teacher enthusiasm, the question was about the teacher in their English class. And the question was about the performance feedback. That was performance feedback of the English class. However, brother, it is very difficult to make a conclusive inference simply because within the Philippine data, there's no comparison. Now, it would have been, I am more confident to say that it made a difference if there was a group of Filipino students who were assessed in Filipino. But I guess we have to refer to earlier studies which do show that the language of assessment and language of testing does affect not just the performance, but the motivational sets. As I think Brother Ray correctly pointed out, and intuitively we have this sense, when you're asking me to read something I don't understand, how can I enjoy that, right? And if my teacher keeps speaking in a language that I don't understand, how can I engage with that? Okay, and that's something we can that Philippine researchers, including DLSU language education researchers, have documented for the past 30 years, if we wish, from the time of Brother Andrew. We have picked that up, but the our education system seems to be hemming and hawing in terms of how to deal with this in a much more circumspect way. I don't know, Rochelle, you have something to add to Brother Ray's question?
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Alan, thank you, Brother Ray. So I think we have 19 major languages now, and it is used teaching. It is used for teaching. So it will be quite problematic if we will be uh, giving the exams in 19 different languages. So I think the decision is something to do with s- coming up with a standardized assessment and choosing English as the language because of the assumption that 15-year-old students are already proficient in the English language.
Mm.
Yeah, I think there's a related question to this. Do you think that we will get better results if we used Filipino or the mother tongue as the language?
Yeah, I saw that question
Yeah.
from John Bernabe. Thank you. Actually, it's an interesting hypothetical because within the language medium of instruction community, there are some people who, when we look at the results deeply, they say, it's very likely that even if we assess the students in reading in the Philippine languages, they may still have performed poorly. Why is that? If you look at the reading framework, which Rochelle briefly pointed out earlier, what's missing, the reason why the students are not performing well is kind of the lack of that higher level metacognitive reading strategies. And it is a question we can ask, would this have been better if it was in Filipino? We don't know. Based on PISA, we don't know. We can't say that. We can speculate. But again, we should be careful in terms of just looking at 15-year-olds' experiences because it may be what they're able to do at this point in the mother tongue and in the English language is already a byproduct of poor reading instruction from the past 10 years. No? So, Mr. John Bernabe, that's a very good question. And those who have discussed this in the past year cannot agree, whether the students, the 15-year-olds would have done better if they're reading in Filipino. We don't know. We have better data in terms of the mother tongue literacy education in the early years, where students do better if we focus on reading in the mother tongue.
There's a
May-
question. Yes, Dr. Rochelle.
So there are also concerns regarding the language of instruction, specifically those using mother tongue as their medium of instruction, because some students may encounter their MOIs as not their nominated mother tongue. So it's actually their second language. So it's really problematic.
Thanks for that. Brother Bernie, would you like to ask your question directly to our panel?
Okay. With the recent NEDA report, education is severely impacted by the pandemic, which will make our progress in education slower. If we take this into consideration, this will mean that we will have poorer results in the future. Do you agree? Then a second question, Rochelle said that the items in the PISA assessment were something on analysis. Are our students trained in the educational system to analyze, to make problem-solving analysis as part of the educational framework?
Let me try before Rochelle. To Brother Bernie's first question, the NEDA also noted that the impact of the pandemic on education is also marked by inequality, so that those from higher income families are able to continue their educational experiences using the online platforms with kind of very minimal disruption, if you wish. But the negative impact on the educational system is much more dire in the low income groups. So I'm just further qualifying Brother Bernie's question. And I think the obvious answer is yes. I know DepEd doesn't want to speak this way, but it's a very scary prospect. We are lucky that the OECD has decided to postpone the PISA. It was scheduled in when was it? 22, but I think they've decided to postpone it one more year. I forget my year, but what I want to assure you is that the PISA was postponed one year globally. So, but that whatever now, in one forum, I asked that question to the DepEd Undersecretary, and he said the Philippines has committed to participating in the next PISA. The preparations are underway, but he said that the Philippines can still back out if it so decides. Okay, but I think, Brother Bernie, you will agree that if we do participate, we're probably gonna and we're if we get very bad results, it's going to be very informative also. Okay, it will be a very powerful reality check, as the current PISA is already calling attention to a lot of very powerful things. Now, if I may, in the second question, Brother Bernie, the DepEd actually commissioned my colleagues in the Philippine Normal University to look at the reading curriculum, and we do cite this in our report. And the analysis of PNU involved comparing the reading framework of PISA with the reading curriculum of the Philippines. And as far as PNU says, those competencies are covered in the current Philippine curriculum. So that's like, this maps onto that kind of thing. But, you know, as I always say, the curriculum is often just a piece of paper. What actually goes on in the classroom and what the teachers and the students engage in the classrooms may be so far removed from what is in the curriculum. So, Brother Bernie, the intention to cover the same competencies exists in the DepEd basic education curriculum, particularly for the secondary school. Whether the students are actually trained to do that, I think the PISA data suggests that that may not be the case.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll take in a couple of questions that were sent to me directly. The first one talks about data. Is the data available for the general public? And then perhaps Mac can show us, you know, a bit of the demonstration, I think, that you wanted to share with our audience.
Yeah, the data is available in the PISA website. And a demonstration about the visualization, may I call on Miss Eunice Chua for a quick demo of the visualization tool that we created. Yes, thank you.
So just to let everyone know, this is currently a work in progress, and we are still currently trying to add more features so that you can freely explore the results of our analysis. So currently the map actually shows the per region average reading score of all of the students that took the PISA from that region. So the PISA data actually has only up until the regional level. It doesn't have geospatial information about the schools. They do have school IDs, however, they are not tied to the actual school names or the location. So the highest level of aggregation that we can do on a map level is really on a regional scale. So what we've done here so far is that you can explore the map. As you can see here, currently ARMM does not have any data because it was not able to participate. So based on this map, what we've done is we've used a diverging color scheme so that we can see those who are at least a little bit higher on the scale, and you can see that NCR is more or less the top. And then you can see which ones are a bit lower, so you can kind of like focus the extremes on both ends. But it does not necessarily mean that they are extremely low, right? And what we've done here on the side, you can see a drop down of the different regions, and it will show you the top 20 features that we were able to identify from our feature extraction or analysis. And we've separated so this actually shows the distribution of the individual student records already. So each data point is present here. The raw data was used, and we just basically use their PV read levels to the 1C, the below 1C, 1C, 1B, 1A, 2 and above, to actually separate them between high and low, right? So the low performing students are the ones who are, I think, 1B and lower, and then those who are 1A and higher are considered as the higher or the better students. So that's basically following the level 2 minimum, what's this, the minimum level of proficiency. So you can see here that you can actually look at the distribution and compare the different regions. And we're still working on connecting the map with the selection here. And we are planning to also show the distribution on the map of each of the 20 top features, so that you can also see the average distribution of the values across the regions while you are viewing the individual regions distribution. Yes, Brother Ray.
Okay. Yeah, did Brother Ray? Okay, yeah, Brother Ray raised his hand.
Okay. That's very, very useful data that you provided there. Even though PISA has been postponed, is it possible to suggest to DepEd to conduct its own like repetition of testing so that it can be like another measure of where we are, let's say, into the pandemic, and get a reading of where our students are. Now, it need not be the whole country, but perhaps maybe some of the regions, especially those that are badly, maybe the results show more deficiencies, could measure it before the PISA comes around. That's my question.
Brother, it's I think we can suggest to DepEd,
Yeah.
but DepEd, because there have been recent meetings, public forums where questions such as that were raised in terms of how do we know that the students are learning, and there are concerns about whether the targets of the curriculum are being attained, because as we know, what's going on in most of the schools is learning continuity rather than assessing achievement. I we can always suggest to DepEd, but we do understand that the processes involved in doing such assessments are constrained. We do know that schools are struggling even to mark the modules that the children are submitting.
Yeah.
So to put in that assessment level might be a bit too difficult for DepEd at this point. The DepEd does have its systems. They do have their internal assessment systems, and they also the USEC in charge of this also has said that they are one of the ways by which they're preparing for the next PISA is indeed by doing kind of trial assessments with similar types of questions in selected schools. So I have a feeling, Brother Ray, they had intended to do that, but that the pandemic kind of disrupted this well-made plans.
Okay. It could be a recommendation to the teacher training institutions to do kind of pilot studies or experiments of what would be effective means to work with, as you mentioned, low engagement, increasing self-esteem, etc., bullying. I think that is doable. That would be an interesting byproduct to encourage teacher training institutions to see if their students or their graduates can also contribute something to what we are trying to correct.
I agree, Brother Ray. In fact, this kind of approach can be engaged in more rational way. So using the visualization tool that Eunice just showed, we can actually show, look, in this region, the students are reporting very low levels of this type of motivation.
Yeah.
So then you can engage the teacher training institutions in that region. Look, compared to the rest of the country, the students in your region are reporting this. So what can we do to help the teachers engage that? So that we like that localization thing, and that's why the visualization tool can help us. We don't think the one size fit all will be important, right? So by indicating what's the specific challenge in this region, then maybe the TEIs can plan accordingly, because they're the ones who are going to deploy the teachers. Ideally, we can even localize it further, except that, as Eunice mentioned, the data in the PISA, and there was a question of how you can access the data. Just go to their website and download it. It's that simple. You don't need permission at all, no? But ideally, if we can locate students in the division, that's actually where the action is. The region is very diverse, for example, no? So if we think of region 6 or region 7, you have some divisions there that are actually doing well, but some of the divisions are not doing well. So I think if we have, I actually inquired, the DepEd knows exactly where each student is, but that's embargoed data, no? So they're doing their own analysis there. Maybe at some point, DepEd will open up this data. But if we can do the visualization so we know exactly that, okay, the students are in this specific school, or maybe not school, in this barangay, or in this division of school, it can be, the visualization tool can really be very targeted, and we can locate, we need to help the teachers in this school because the students are saying this and that, but now we only have regional level data to work with.
Thank you for
Thanks,
that. I actually have so many other questions, but maybe I'd like to ask if Brother Hans would like to raise his comment or question to the group personally, directly.
Good morning. Mine is more of a observation, and it has been addressed mostly by already the discussion that's been going on. The modular system that's going on currently would be impacted by this study, and it just brings out a concern for me with regards to our students' performance during this time of pandemic, especially those who are in modular system. The difficulty they must be experiencing just even trying to understand the modules, if their reading comprehension is so bad and their self-concept of reading is also pushing down upon them. I just feel for our students who are struggling in this manner. And I can understand also if how mental health can also be further aggravated because of this reading comprehension self-concept weighing down upon them and the pressure to do the modules. Yes. The question really is also, I agree with Brother Ray, in terms of how can we as learning institutions, especially in the areas of education, help in training teachers to further enhance the reading self-concept of the students. Those strategies, those means, perhaps also exploring what strategies of instructions are developmental for the reading comprehensions of the students could be really shared, especially in the grassroots, where even the reading teachers and comprehension teachers might also have their own negative self-concept towards reading. That's just my observation.
Does anyone in the team want to comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Sige,
can
sir.
try. You know, Brother Hans, one of the important reforms that was undertaken in the curriculum for training teachers, so this is the curriculum for BSE and BE, is that all teachers graduates now have to take courses in developmental reading. So I think, Rochelle, you can verify it's still required developmental reading 1 and developmental reading 2, right? I think Brother Hans, your department teaches this, handles this course, right? So this was actually an insight that just started fairly recently, you know, that all teachers should know how students read. Okay. But this is a fairly new development in the training of teachers. So we still have an overwhelming majority of the in-service teachers who have no understanding of the problem of reading. So we probably have to wait for that generation of teachers to really take hold of this problem. But yes, you know, we don't have to wait. I think Brother Hans is correct. We can take steps to help teachers, particularly in primary school, teach reading more effectively. But Brother Hans, if I may, I would like to push it further earlier. We do know that the early literacy experiences are very powerful. And not just in preschool education or early childhood education. If there are interested people who really want to develop better learners, we should start in the families. We should find ways to help parents who may not be readers and who may not even be literate develop the early reading competencies that will be important scaffolds for their preschool reading experience, for their mother tongue literacy experience. And Brother Hans, if I may, these are simple things like engaging mothers to play with their children in phonological awareness games, which can be, you know, board games. We have like simple reading aloud activities before they get into preschool, which in a lot of middle class families, mothers and yayas already do, but doesn't happen in a lot of low income families. So there's been a lot of research, again, in other countries and to some extent in Philippine communities where such activities at home have a long effect towards keeping students good readers in primary and secondary. So yeah, I think systemic, not just in schools, although I understand that the schools are obvious areas of intervention, but in the communities that we work with, if we can work with mothers and other caregivers as well. And I think the possibility, I've seen some of my colleagues in Hong Kong and the United States develop tablet applications, you know, and these don't have to be connected to the internet. This can be applications where the child is engaged in, you know, phonological awareness tasks in a very engaging visual manner. We can get into the debate whether it should be mother tongue or English, but you know, that those are problems that are solvable, I think. But yeah, I think, brother, you point to many areas of engagement, both the teachers and even the micro environment of these kids.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
If
Yeah,
I
just
may
to
share.
respond to Alan, Doc Alan, one of the more interesting things when I was a principal also, I got my first statistical tool, so I ran it, all of the grades of the students, well, just for fun. And one of the biggest findings I came out was that reading was highly correlated with all the other subjects, science, math, Filipino. Reading was the most basic and the core for those who got high scores in reading would tend to get higher scores in all the other subjects. Those who got low scores in reading tended to get lower scores in everything else. So I do believe the importance of reading. Thank you.
Okay,
Rochelle?
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
Shell.
thank you, brothers. If I may share, no, Remember, Brother Oka, we had a project with DZMM, the Reading Caravan, about a decade ago. So DLSU was invited, no, to join DZMM kasi they have their weekly dental and medical mission. And one of the activities is the Reading Caravan. Engaging parents. The target is parents. The parents are taught how to read to their kids. Tapos they create stories pa for their kids, no, while they're working, while they're doing their chores. So sayang, hindi yun natuloy, no? Parang one term lang yun, Brother Oka. So hopefully, if everything is back to normal, we can still be engaged in activities like this.
Thank you for those responses. I have another question from Doc Yami. What do you think about deploying software reading tutors to help improve the reading and comprehension skill, but also help improve self-image and motivation?
Yeah, if I may, sorry guys. Yes, just because it's very engaging, the visualization can make it more attractive to the kids and to the parents also, right? But in addition to what Doc Yami adds, it's getting these kids also used to this medium. Okay, students in LaSalle and their families, from the day they're born, are already playing with their tablets. Okay, so there's a high degree of comfort with this modality of learning. But as the data show, we do have a good number of students who don't even engage in the technology for searching online information or chatting for learning. So if we can get students to be comfortable with this technology early on, then you can imagine that when the pandemic happens, I don't hope it happens again, but something similar happens in the future, it'd be much easier for students to transition to this technology, whether it's online or just the device itself. It's less threatening to them. Because somehow paper is much more threatening. If you show me a module that's this thick, it's kind of more intimidating and disengaging than, flipping through something in a tablet. And hopefully in the future, there can be steps taken to make the cost of these tablets so much more accessible. And that is where private foundations and local governments can probably invest, because once they're used to this technology, oh man, we can teach math, we can teach programming, we can teach machine learning to these kids as early as 3 years old or 4 years old. It's that they have to see this as not something that is scary, and develop, as the brothers mentioned earlier, that they should feel like this is something I can do. This is something I can be good at, instead of something for them to be scared of.
Okay, thank you for that. I just want to mention a comment that was typed in our YouTube channel. It actually comes from Sterling Plata. Just a comment on our earlier discussion that DepEd actually has a project on testing students on PISA-like questions. And there is also an ongoing professional development for English, math, and science for junior high school teachers. Okay, maybe just one last question before we wrap up. This is from Lindsay Ang Tan. Considering that there are variables that grade school and high school students do not have control with, such as being born in a poor family, school infrastructure not conducive for learning, etc., should we consider the focus first on fortifying students' motivation, such as educating them about neuroplasticity, mastery, goal orientation, which these aspects I think students have control over? Could this address the students' accepted idea that they cannot further learn?
Lindsay is one of my bright students, so thanks for that question. Mostly I agree with what you're saying, but I don't want this. What the data are suggesting is that these are not things that the student is completely in control of. Okay, so even if the motivation resides in the individual, what all the research and even these data show, and the socio-ecological model suggests, that these motivations don't occur in a vacuum. Okay, so these motivational sets are adaptive within that communities. So specifically, for example, Lindsay mentioned the training students in neuroplasticity as part of growth mindset training programs. In an earlier paper that I published, it shows that the growth mindset actually is not associated with achievement for students in lower income families. So, in other words, having a growth mindset is not automatically going to make that child a more engaged learner, because the growth mindset has to deal with the environment. So what is the growth mindset? Just those of you who may not be familiar with what Lindsay is saying, it's the belief that if I put effort, I can change my intelligence. I can improve my intelligence. But if you put this child who believes I can improve my intelligence in an environment where the resources to improve my intelligence are not there, that growth mindset is a dead end. It does not make a difference. Our analysis of the PISA data involving the growth mindset shows that if the child who has a growth mindset is in a well-resourced environment, then it benefits the child. So the attempt to change the intelligence, to improve the intelligence, has the necessary social supports. So, Lindsay, you have the right idea, but let's not think that this motivation is completely within the student's control. I think our message here is that if our students don't have strong motivation, if the students are not engaged, it's not their fault. It is a product, it is an adaptive response to what's going on in their micro and meso environment. And if I may, even in the larger social environment, if we have so many models, celebrities, politicians who are successful in spite of their low academic achievement, you will understand why students feel di naman importante yung school. Okay? So it's, the students they're not blank boxes. They're making these motivational choices based on what they see. And they encounter a school, but look at what they see on TV. Look at what they see in larger society. Look at what they see in their barangay and local communities. Those also shape the students' motivation. So these students that we're describing, they may not be engaged in the school, but they may be engaged perhaps in their sporting community, maybe in their church community, or maybe in their dance group in the school, outside the school. No? So it's not that these students have no motivation. Maybe they have found their motivation, they found their engagement outside the school, which is not a bad thing. But we educators should be worried about the fact that they're not engaged in the school. As I said, they're there in body, but not mind and spirit. That's what we should attend to. And it's not just working on the student, it's the school environment as well.
Okay, thank you so much, panel, and thank you so much for a very engaging audience. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. There are so many comments in the chat, but maybe if the audience would want to reach out to our panelists, where can they get in touch with you?
We're all in LaSalle.
So you can look for them in LaSalle,
yes,
or if you're free to share your email address, maybe you can put it in the chat. Or you can, everyone has my email. So if you have a question, you can send it to me and I'll try to connect you with our speakers today.
Well, I'm typing my email address, and if I may share, Mac, in our PowerPoint slide, let me just advertise. If you can just take a photo of the QR code there. If you want to read the full report here, it is open access. Don't worry. Even if your school does not subscribe to it, you can download the full text article for free. Sorry for those who don't understand SVM. You can email Mac if you want to understand the SVM analysis. But you can just take your phone and take a photo of this QR code and you can download the article for free. Thank you very much. And our emails are there also.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so thank you so much. But before I let everyone go, I just wanted to announce our next speaker for the next sustainability lecture series. So kindly give me some time. Okay, so next month, which will be on November 24, we're having Maria Jose Quintana Garcia. So we'll have the lectures in the evening. It will be at 7 p.m. Sorry, that's supposed to be 7 to 8. Anyway, those who are interested to register, just kindly click on the QR code or go to bit.ly/DLSU11. So hope to see you in our next webinar series. So thank you, everyone. And I'm not sure if everyone got the link to our evaluation. So I will just type it in here again in the chat box. So for those of you, please let us know how we can further improve our lecture series, or if you have any further comments and suggestions. So with that, thank you everyone and have a great day ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.